All right. Lights out. Chapter 57. I'm going to do it. I'm going to try, or at least part of it. Maybe. In 7 parts, so they're short, and if I have to redo them, I'm not wasting so much time reading it and ruining my voice and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Mark and Roman were running across a large field toward observation post 6. Run might have been a strong word. It was more of a jog, but in the dark and carrying their rifles, it was as fast as they dared go. Mark strained his eyes, looking for holes or irregularities in the ground that could trip them. The field, thank goodness, was fairly smooth. As near as Mark could figure, it had been used for hay. There were no cattle on it, and the grass was cut ankle high and very even. He could barely make out a thick grove of trees on the other side, but it was impossible to judge the distance in the poor light. He hoped that the observation post was just on the other side. His mind was racing faster than his feet. What could have happened? Who was assigned to observation post 6? He wished he'd asked the command post before he left. Would Rob be able to get there before it was too late? And too late for what? Just like everything else since the burst, it seemed there were many questions and few answers. He noticed that his breathing was starting to get a little labored. He looked over at Roman and saw that he wasn't breathing hard at all. The young man held his grandfather's prized Winchester in both hands, with the barrel pointed at 2 o'clock, and ran with an easy, smooth gait that Mark envied. Youth truly is wasted on the young, Mark thought. His mind switched back to OP6. He played out various scenarios in his mind and worked out the best response to each one. Whatever was happening, he needed to, battery getting low, to approach quietly and find out what the problem was. If he burst into the open, he could find himself in deep doo-doo. They were approaching the tree line, and Mark could see there was a fence separating it from the field they were in. Mark wondered if there was a gate, but he couldn't see one. He took Roman's rifle, and the young man climbed the fence and was on the other side so quickly Mark almost thought he must have jumped over. He handed the 2 rifles over the fence to the agile young man and started to negotiate the fence himself. His weight, which was around 40 pounds more than Roman's, made the wires give enough that he was nervous the old rusty fencing might break. He slowly increased his weight on each wire as he went up to make sure it would hold. Finally, he was high enough to swing his leg over. This was the part all men hate. If one of the wires broke at this point, a man was guaranteed a seat in the soprano section of the church choir. He slowly swung his right leg over, holding his breath and whispering a prayer. His foot found the wire on the other side, and he carefully transferred his weight to that side. Not wanting to stay in the precarious position any longer than necessary, he quickly swung his left leg up, but it caught on one of the barbs that somehow, after years in the elements, was still razor sharp. The barb dug into the back of his leg just above his knee. Mark bit his tongue to keep himself from saying the word that the pain had automatically triggered in his mind. He moved his leg away from the wire, and the small knife-like protrusion excoriated a piece of flesh as it freed itself. Mark had to bite harder this time to save his dollar. He stepped down onto the ground and gave thanks to be on terra firma almost as much as he had the time he'd gotten seasick on an offshore fishing trip. He didn't kiss the ground this time, though. Roman handed him his rifle, and they looked for the best way through the woods. The underbrush was thick, and every plant seemed to have descended from the rusty barbed wire they had just climbed. This, coupled with the almost moonless night, made the going very slow and painful. Mark estimated they'd gone 50 yards when he heard the first shot. It seemed to have come from right in front of them. They froze and listened, both subconsciously holding their breath. An eternity passed while the entire planet held its breath with them. Even the wind stopped. Then Hell's gates opened. The gunfire was so fast and furious that it sounded like one long artillery barrage. A bullet whistled over Mark's head, and a second later one thwacked into a tree he was standing next to. He and Roman instantly went horizontal, and not even feeling the heretofore irritating and hurtful spines, needles, and stickers abundant in this spot. Mark gestured in a direction perpendicular to their previous line of travel. Once he thought one he thought would take them out of the line of fire but still keep them parallel to the opening of the pipeline. Roman nodded, and both pulled their feet under them and ran in the direction Mark had indicated. Under normal circumstances, the noise they made would have been sufficient to alert anyone within a mile of their proximity, but the constant enfilade of fire would have masked the sound of a herd of charging elephants. They dashed 100 yards in Olympic-class time, with the briars and brambles clawing unmercifully to slow them down. The angry buzzing of supersonic projectiles lessened as they moved to the west, partly because the rate of fire was slowing with each passing moment, but mostly because they had moved out of the path of the bullets. Now only an occasional shot whizzed high over their heads. Mark stopped behind a huge tree he and Roman could use for cover as they tried to catch their breath. Mark smelled the cordite in the air, and it left a putrid, acidic taste in his throat with each gulp he took in. The rate of fire continued to slow until it sounded like the last few kernels of Jiffy Pot deciding to give in. Mark's breathing slowed to where he was only gasping for air, and he heard a familiar voice from what sounded to be several hundred feet away. "This is the Wilson County Sheriff's Department. Put down your weapons and come out into the open. You will not be harmed," Rob's voice called out. The answer was another round of rifle fire. This one didn't last as long. A minute later, Rob yelled again. "You boys can sit over there and shoot up all your ammo if you want, but we're not going anywhere. Why don't you make it easy on yourselves and surrender?"